Workforce of One, Revolutionizing Talent Management Through Customization. And our presenters are David Smith and Susan Cantrell. David Smith is a 1987 graduate of the Gleason College of Engineering at RIT and the Senior Managing Director of the Accenture Talent and Organization Practice within the Accenture Strategy Organization. He specializes in designing and developing talent and organization strategies and solutions for Accenture clients. He has extensive international experience working with some of the world's largest global companies, including a number of Fortune 500 companies. A regular guest lecturer at Wharton Business School and Babson College, and a frequent speaker at industry conferences and events, David has also authored and co-authored several articles and papers and has contributed his viewpoints on talent management to various business media and industry publications. Susan Cantrell is a research fellow at the Accenture Institute for High Performance. She specializes in conducting original research and providing innovative thought leadership in the area of talent management, with a specific focus on how challenges in information technology and creating new opportunities for companies to effectively manage their people. She has a broad business background, having previously worked as an investment advisor and on a variety of research projects in both information technology and strategy. She has co-authored more than 40 articles and book chapters. She holds a master's degree in Management Information Systems from Boston University School of Management and a Bachelor of Arts degree in English Literature from Vassar College. Together, David and Susan have authored Workforce of One, Revolutionizing Talent Management Through Customization, which is published by Harvard Business Press. In their book, they argue that since the competitive global marketplace now includes 4 generations of employees with widely diverse backgrounds, values, and skill sets, companies that want to hire and keep the best talent, the essential prerequisite for high performance, will need to treat individual employees as a workforce of one, quote unquote. Susan and David will show us how exceptional companies are tailoring work experiences to employees' talents and interests, customizing job duties, training, recognition, and even compensation, work schedules, and performance appraisals. The reward? Lower turnover, greater productivity, and improved profit margins. With that, let me welcome David and Susan.
Great, thank you, Craig, and welcome to everybody joining us today on this RIT Alumni Series webcast. I think hopefully we have a few good things to share, some pointers for each of you to take away and apply, you know, in various forms, whether it's for you personally, whether it's for you as a manager back at your organization, or, you know, in roles coming onto campus to attract, you know, whether it's co-ops or recent graduates. I think hopefully we've got some ideas in the talent management space that will help you be effective in what you're doing. As Craig said, I'm an '87 alum from the Kate Gleason School, and as an electrical engineering grad, you know, a lot of people wonder how I came to, you know, come to running a very large HR practice for Accenture globally. And in many ways, that analogy is very similar to the analogy of what we'll talk to you about on Workforce of One, and that is, you know, allowing really people to figure out, you know, their path forward in an individualized way, and having talent management practices that enable that to the best of the individual as well as to the best of the organization. And I think, you know, hopefully we've got some ideas that you guys can take away today and share back with your organizations. As we begin, I think we look at the marketplace and look at the tension that's going on as we all compete for talent. The difference today, you know, compared to a few years ago, is it's not just an industry sector-based view competing for talent. So it's not high-tech companies competing with high-tech companies for the same talent, and hospitality companies competing for hospitality companies. As we see digital entering, you know, almost every industry today, you know, competition for talent is actually across multiple industries. And so how can you and your organization really become, you know, competitive in that environment in a differentiated way, you know, as you compete now with walls that are much lower than they were before. And we think, you know, some of the notions around customization around your organization and around talent management are very, very important. We've published most of this work that we'll share, and we continue to update it through the book published through Harvard, and it's a combination of really some advanced thought leadership and research that we did with our Institute for High Performance and with Sue Cantrell as our lead fellow for that work, as well as some practical experiences from our practice around the world. And we think the combination of those two things is actually what helps differentiate some of the ideas that sit behind workforce of one and this notion of customization, both the you know, theoretical background and some of the research that we've done, but then maybe more importantly, seeing how organizations are implementing some of these pieces and trying to understand the nuggets that that come out of it. As a way to begin, we kind of take a peer backwards and probably go all the way back to, you know, 2006. In 2006, Time magazine named their Person of the Year to be you. And it was meant to be you as an individual. It proclaimed that you, me, and every other individual controls the information age. Today we'd call it the digital age, but it's the same thing. And that me as an individual is powerful in today's economy. Individuals have power over everything they do, both in their personal lives as well as their professional lives, and expect and even demand in many ways that products and services you know, that are delivered to them meets the individual needs. And we see this in many, many other, you know, parts of the world. So the real question is, you know, how do you take that concept and begin to apply it into the workspace? The thing that we see when you begin to do that and look at this notion of you and me is the power of customization. Whether it's in the products and services, now you can custom build your Nike shoes, and we have a number of great alumni from RIT that you know, are Nike practitioners today. But using the ability to walk in and use a kiosk or a home, you know, your home computer to customize your exact Nike shoes and have them delivered to your doorstep, both size, color, width, is quite amazing. Obviously, Amazon has been at the forefront of the customization trend and really thinking about how to deliver products and services to you, and then even go so far as to make recommendations, obviously, based on your buying patterns and habits. You see Hera is applying this into the entertainment space, obviously YouTube in their custom and configuration, but we see it going further today than we've ever seen it before. We see customized supply chains and big changes going on in supply chains around the world to custom configure the supply chain. We see it going on in medicine and individual medicine. We see it advancing into the education space. I would say RIT with its co-op programs has been sort of at the forefront because you know, many of its programs allow individuals to custom configure based on their experiences, not only their academic side of what they do, but also the co-op side of what they do. So customization has revolutionized entire fields of human endeavor. And now the real question is, how do you take that granularity and begin to apply it into the talent management space and what they do? I think we also see it continuing to expand. You see the revolution going on in 3D printing, which is really taking the concept of mass, creating in mass through an assembly line or through a product plant, and actually now custom configuring products at site, you know, to serve many, many industries, whether it's the medicine and healthcare industry with custom configuring, you know, braces for broken arms today using 3D printing on site, to having the same thing going on with, you know, workers showing up to repair your home cable system and a part's missing, and them, you know, literally making a part on site through a 3D printer. This notion of taking from the mass and creating down to an individual level, that same thing is beginning to apply into many fields of endeavor. And in fact, into the HR and talent management space. We see it also, and we see the challenges that organizations have with that, because many organizations today would say, I'm thinking about customization, for my employees and how I begin to apply, but I'm not getting a systemic impact on many of the benefits that Craig talked to. And you see the little cartoon here with Grimsley, where they think they're actually treating each employee in an individualized, customized way by, each person having a unique employee number. And what we're talking about is many advances beyond that and the challenges beyond that. So the notion of what we look at today is really the shift that says all the work that organizations, Global 2000, Fortune 500s have done really over the past 50 years to take us into a new age, to make sure that, we've defined for the organization, talent, skills, and capabilities that are important for the organization's success, and apply those into everything we do, from recruitment and the profiles that we do in recruitment, all the way through talent management practices and performance management processes. We look at it too much in a single monolithic approach, and the notion begins to say, wait, isn't there a different way that we should begin to think about this? And should we think about treating each and every employee under this notion of workforce of one in this customized way? And I think the balance that we have is, how far do you take that and find commonality at the right customization or segmentation level without it becoming, really a problem for the organization, but keeping it sort of in today's as-is profile, where we're not taking a level of customization down to the next level, is actually causing a competitive disadvantage for my organization or for your organization. So we think organizations need to begin to think about and look at this differently. In the age of digital, in the age of extended workforces, in the age of diversity winning the day, we think customizing into talent management is really important. We profile in the book a case study of Helen and Jill that are two real life first level IT project managers in two Fortune 500 consumer products companies. If you took away their profile and looked at them, obviously the same gender, the same nationality, they have the same exact job profile, and they're both top performers. Yet what makes those things work actually are the differences that underlie it. The goals of Helen versus Jill as a 29-year-old and what she's trying to achieve versus Helen, who really likes her job as a first-line manager, is performing very well, but actually isn't aspiring to something different. How they're both learning in very, very different ways. How they configure their work environments and their work styles in completely different ways. And ultimately, what motivates them are very different. All of those things actually underlie and are the underpinning behind talent management practices in the organization. And I think what's important as we put these notions out there are the changes that are going on. So as you, as a participant on today's call, you may or may not be in HR. I think our view and our research is saying, this notion of having business leaders actually beginning to take much more ownership in combination with HR to drive talent management to the next level is very, very important. Our research looked at some of the world's best companies and what they do, from PepsiCo and Procter & Gamble, and Sue will talk about a number of examples of what we've done. We looked across multiple industries. We looked at global. We looked at U.S.-centric organizations as well. And, underneath it, what we tried to do is we tried to come up with a number of techniques that organizations begin to look at. As Craig talked about at the beginning of this, we think the analogy of the benefits that underlie this are very similar to the benefits that have gone on in the marketing space, trying to go after higher levels of customization. In the customization and marketing and sales side, obviously you're trying to drive up revenues. The Nike example of having the ability to custom configure your shoes is all about growth, in that marketplace and driving higher levels of revenue. In the automotive sector and in the hotel and hospitality sector, customer sat is really, really important. So that custom configuration, if you look at the Marriott brands, in driving a number of different segments now in their branding strategy is all about, meeting and predicting expectations and aligning really to a different level of business traveler that have different levels of customization expectations than they've had before. On the employee side of this, we see, some of the same analogies apply with increased performance and productivity levels and engagement levels and SAT levels. So a direct correlation between the two is really what our research begins to show, and Sue will talk a little bit about this. I hit on a number of these points, the catalysts that have underlied really this notion of customization coming into talent management. Obviously, the digital world as we know it, technology enabling customization is a key component to it. Employees are customers, so the point of that is in our personal lives, our ability in our personal lives to have customized experiences, customized products and services delivered to us are those same expectations that are occurring from us as individuals and our people from the organizations. And the shift that we see obviously going on in the knowledge workspace in what we're doing. And lastly, I think the diversity both in thought as well as in all the demographics that we see really are drivers that we see that underpin this. So the real question then is, how can we practically begin to customize without it creating chaos? And Workforce of One is about scalability, but it's also about guardrails and control and manageability. We recognize, obviously, when we say Workforce of One, in many instances, particularly for the global 2000, Fortune 500, it's not down to the exact individual level. There are segments that really become a cornerstone to the methodology and the process. But meeting the business needs and the employee needs in combination, I think all research points to when you do that, actually you have high performance at a different, level. So Workforce of One is not about obviously free agents and everybody having individual contracts. It is not about, just singularity, empowerment to the individual to do what they want. It's about putting, that capability into the hands of the organization to figure out, where those lines are. So as we look forward, what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to Sue to actually now give you insight into the 4 approaches that really underpin this concept of customization into talent management that become the cornerstone of Workforce of One. So with that, I'll turn to Sue Cantrell to take you through some of the next concepts and approaches.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here. Right, so as Dave was saying, customization really doesn't have to be chaotic, and based on our research with probably over 100 organizations, we determined that there were 4 different ways organizations could customize while still achieving some degree of control, some degree of scalability and coordination without it devolving into chaos. So I'm going to take you through those 4 approaches to customization and try to give you some examples of how organizations have customized to help you see how this actually works in practice. So the first approach we saw basically takes a direct chapter from marketing. So just as marketers have been segmenting consumers for really decades, they've got us pegged as suburban moms or clothes-conscious teens or techno geeks. Well, we can do the same thing within our companies with employees. So we can segment distinct groups of employees that share similar characteristics. The idea then is that we create tailored people management practices for each of those specific groups that share similar kinds of characteristics. So just to give you a couple examples of how this works in practice, For a long time, organizations have been segmenting on workforce, or it became popular a while ago to segment on, value, whether or not you're a high potential or a member of a critical workforce, really important for the organization's success. What's interesting here in segmentation is that recent advances in analytics are really spurring a revolution in how companies are segmenting their workforce. And they're really starting to segment their workforce in much more meaningful and germane ways. So companies today can creatively group their employees on a lot of different dimensions, like learning styles. How do you learn best? Values. What matters to you? Going back to the case of Jill and Helen, of what motivates you in work. Personality types, wellness profiles, mobility patterns, even behavior. Just as marketers look at consumer behavior, now HR is looking at employee behavior, and even networking and communication styles. So technologies and analytics allow people now to have a data-based understanding of employees that really creates a whole new window for companies to see into the very hearts, minds, and behaviors of their people. So just a couple of examples. In our own company, Accenture, we segment our employees based on indications of a person's overall well-being. So we actually analyze data like number of vacation days an individual has taken, the length of time an individual has spent on a specific project, or whether or not an employee received or didn't receive a promotion he was working towards. And then we alert our manager about those employees who may be at risk for leaving the company or at risk for burnout or stress-related issues. And then we provide those managers with kind of a retention kit to help those managers make sure that they're helping and coaching those employees that may be at risk to make sure that they're performing at their best. Another fun example, we interviewed a restaurant chain, and they segmented their employees based on their career aspirations, or what motivated them to come into work every day. So they found three categories. One, who people were just their second wage earners, so they worked at a restaurant at night on top of another job. Another category were those who were really working to have fun. Restaurants are a very social kind of work, and a lot of people just really were motivated to work in the industry for that social reason. And then third, those that were desiring a long-term career in the industry and really wanted to climb that career ladder. And then they segmented based on those particular segments, and they gave the fun lovers, for example, the opportunity to work at any of the company's restaurants throughout the country, and they could jump from restaurant to restaurant, going from Portland, Oregon to Miami, Florida, and indulge their wanderlust working at various restaurants a couple months at a time. I'm going to move on to the next customization approach, which we call modular choices. I jokingly call this the Happy Meal approach to customization, because just as McDonald's provides choices in their Happy Meals, you want chicken nuggets or a hamburger, milk or juice, so too can organizations provide a very limited select number of modular options for employees to choose from. And the idea is that by limiting the options from a predefined list of organizationally sanctioned alternatives, then the company has some ability to control. It becomes more manageable. It's more affordable. But at the same time, it lets our employees have some choice to express our unique individuality, and most importantly, to pick options that are most in tune with what we feel will help us be most effective and happy at work. So I'm going to give you an example of how this plays out in an organization. The most obvious place that it's been playing out now for a number of years is in learning. So it used to be that we would go to a training class sponsored by the training department, and it would be maybe a half-day affair. Today, digital technologies are allowing us to break down learning content into very small modular components so that it can be kind of mass configured at the granular level by the individual employee. So just as we create custom playlists of music on our iPods so too can learners custom configure learning on the fly. They might choose a 10 to 20-minute bite-sized learning component of a short video or a short simulated game or a traditional e-learning piece, or they might have a podcast or a virtual classroom. And that allows individuals to kind of choose the type of learning that they learn best from, as well as the content that they need, rather than having to sit in through an entire class and some learning content that they might already know. They can just grab the content that they need. So even some companies are offering in their learning portals to offer an assessment for employees to take to determine what learning style they have, and then they push options and push choices based on an individual's learning style. Another interesting example is the idea of breaking down jobs into modular components. So instead of having a single job, some companies are experimenting with devolving the job into kind of a series of tasks. So a consulting company, for example, took apart the series of job tasks in some of their consulting jobs, and they identified small, discrete chunks of work that then could be modularly configured based on an individual's interest and skill. Internal temporary staffing agencies do the same thing. So with a skills database, different projects can be sent and suggested to various kinds of employees, and then those employees can kind of mix and match projects based on their skill and interest profiles. The third approach to customization that we found in our research is what we call broad and simple rules. And this is really where HR defines a rule very broadly and very simply, but it still has very clear boundaries. But the idea is it's so simply and broadly defined that it can be flexibly interpreted in a variety of ways. So it's a little bit more understandable if we take a couple of analogies. If any of you have seen the TV show The Amazing Race, teams compete in a race around the world to get from one destination to another. So the destination is defined, but how they get there is completely left to them. So they might go from the ruins of Rio, Greece to a desert in Oman, and they have to decide what plane to take and what route to take. And similarly, employees can be told the destination or the end business goal, but how they achieve it can be left up to them. Same kind of thing works in taxonomy classification schemes. Instead of very narrowly defining like a species, like a bear, instead you much more broadly define the kingdom Animalia, and then a bear and a panda and a red fox can all fit within that broad and simple rule, allowing a much more diverse array of behaviors and people. So the important thing about this broad and simple rules is that there are guardrails or boundaries to help keep people within limits and make sure that the organization maintains some control. The interesting thing here is that there are different kinds of boundaries. So you could define a boundary based on results, like as long as you achieve the business outcome, then you can figure out how to do it yourself. But boundaries might also be time constraints, money constraints, based on the strategy of an organization or based on the organizational scope. And I'll give you some examples here. One way of achieving broad and simple rules is to define a job much more broadly than just a narrow series of tasks. And that really lets the job mold to fit the person's passions and strengths, which can improve productivity. So an interesting example of this using a time constraint or time boundary is at Google. Their engineers famously spend 80% of their time on their core job, and then the remaining 20% of their job can be fully customized based on their interests and passions and strengths, as long as they are working on projects that they feel have a great potential to create value for Google, then they can completely customize that time. Another example at WL Gore, which is a maker of Gore-Tex clothing, they actually don't have any jobs at all. Instead, employees determine their own roles and tasks on each project, and they work within the loose limits of kind of general functional or broad areas only, like crunching numbers or running machinery. And they're expected to commit to projects that match their skills and interests, as well as the needs of the business, but people can kind of create their own jobs based on their interests. At W.L. Gore, another interesting customization practice is customizing compensation based on the broad and simple rule of based on employees' ability to contribute to the organization. So what they do is they have pay that's broadly defined in terms of outcomes and strategic contribution, and they basically poll a person's colleagues within a team, and then those colleagues rank that person in terms of their contribution to the group, and then pay raises are calculated in proportion to the individual's effort and contribution, and using general guidelines based on external salary data, the company pays employees at the top of the list more than they pay those at the bottom. There's one last customization approach that we discovered in our research, and we call this approach employee-defined personalization. And this really takes a chapter from a lot of the innovations that have been happening in the consumer world in the last 5 years, where consumers really define and create their own content using video sharing sites like YouTube or Wikipedia or Linux, or you can think about online markets like eBay, where consumers can trade directly with one another with no intermediary at all. Recently, technology has done a lot to advance this area, and we're seeing this play out in talent management practices just as it's been playing out in the consumer end. So a couple of examples here. Learning is one of the most obvious places where this has been playing out. So instead of taking a training course from a centrally defined training department, today employees can really learn from one another through the help of digital technology. So they may look up an employee who knows a lot in a particular area that they need help in to solve a technology problem, for example. And they may look up a friend on a corporate version of Facebook and locate that friend and instant message him with a question. Or they may join a community of practice or discussion group or post it on a blog or wiki. Or they may search for a video online that another employee had contributed. Microsoft does this very well. They have a variety of applications, blogs, wikis, online bulletin boards, YouTube and Facebook-like applications that can all be accessed on your device of choice for employees to learn from one another. Another example of employee-defined personalization is what we call bottom-up career path profiling. So the notion here is that today we can use technology to capture people's promotion and transfer histories and kind of figure out common career paths or uncommon career paths that people have taken in an organization that way, and deliver that to employees to help them understand different ways of navigating through an organization. And then what they can do is if they find somebody who's taken an uncommon career path starting from a place similar to where that employee is with a similar kind of skills and job role, then they can use social networking technology to network with that person and talk about how they were able to navigate that particular career. Well, those are the 4 approaches to customization and some brief examples to give you an idea of how it plays out in organizations. And I'm going to turn it back over to David again, who is going to talk a bit about some of the benefits of customization for organizations, and then talk a little bit about how organizations are building their capabilities to deliver customization.
Great. Thanks, Sue, and thanks for that overview of the 4 approaches. And some of the examples of how to think through it. I think as we look at the research and we look at the practice going on with a number of organizations, obviously we see a lot of experimentation going on. Organizations continue to tell us, yeah, I'm trying this and I'm trying that. And I think what we see evolving is really this becoming much more systemic into the approach to talent management, as opposed to singularly an experimentation approach. So when you begin to embed this in a much more systemic way, obviously you've got to pilot and experiment, different approaches, but it's really the mindset to say, I'm doing that in a much more systemic way for organization success. And I think when you look at the output of doing that, we see a lot of benefits coming into the organization. On the employee side, obviously engagement and productivity are very important. A lot of organizations are going after marketing their brand, their employer brand and employment brand. So having a reputation, that's really at the top of their industry to compete for top talent becomes a very important, reason to think about this and drive this. And then on the output side, obviously, retention, that we heard at the front end of this call, we see increases in employee retention to that employer, really trying to, get to the ultimate output, I guess, or outcome of business results, whatever they are for the organization, higher levels of sales, service capability, et cetera. When we think about the challenges that organizations face, obviously, as you listen to this, there are things that you probably begin to think about. Aspects of privacy. In the digital world, we all face this issue of finding the right balance of privacy, having employees, opt into a number of these pieces so that you can begin to custom configure, what you're doing. Finding the right balance of control and making sure that you've got the guardrails, as Sue talked about, in your policies and procedures and approaches, but there really are guardrails, and making sure, that you're driving the right level of customization and control to that, as opposed to diving into chaos. One of the biggest aspects is fairness and finding the balance of fairness. And I think, what we think about, is this notion of justice rather than equality. And organizations and people begin to understand when the organization has put procedures for determining differences in the way they treat, and those differences and approaches are fair, you begin to overcome the notion of the methodology of why decisions were made, and it begins to get out to the organization in a positive as opposed to a negative way. And then lastly, alignment to the business strategy of what the organization is trying to do to make sure that you're achieving outcome-based views of what you're doing. I think when we look to the future, we also see, this notion of, my way becoming a very important point. And in fact, some of this terminology has been adopted by Microsoft in the way they manage talent management for their employees. And some of this gets, to the competitive notion that they face in really trying to invent the next version of Microsoft for the future in this technology space with very different competitors than they had in the past, with the Facebooks and the Googles and the Twitters, and how they begin to think about that level of customization that looks much more like the old as opposed to what they currently have today. And then two aspects that I think are coming into the organization to think about from a skills and capability standpoint that you need to think about. The first is analytics, to have the insights. When Sue starts to talk about segmentation and applying choice as an example to segmentation, having analytics that underlie that obviously balance the reward benefit side with the cost side of it, but more importantly, the effect side of it into the business side of it. So driving analytics into talent management, into HR processes is becoming very, very important to drive the insights that we talked about as well. We think the future then is going to look much different when you begin to put analytics in place. And the analogy that I would use, comes to this notion of the HR organization looking much more like a marketing organization than it ever has in the past. In fact, we see a number of our clients beginning to rotate marketing people through HR and playing a role in HR. So the way that they thought about, their customers and creating propositions for their customers, how they did some level of segmentation and value analysis of customers, those same things go on with segmentation and value analysis as an example for our employees. And then how you begin to put propositions in place for them. So we think we're beginning to see quite a big, change in the makeup of roles in talent management, from business, business leaders playing a much more dynamic role, analytics driving into talent management, marketing driving into talent management, in a much stronger way for the future. And I'll conclude on this, and then we'll take some questions, I guess. And I guess we can capture some through the chat, but I'll turn it to Craig to tell us how we can do that. When we look to the future, we think the trends that we looked at in our research and that we published through the book, are only going to actually become stronger. The notion is becoming easier now through technology to customize, and the expectations of both the employee as well as the employer are driving this to a much higher level. So we think, obviously organizations will have to continue to get the hygiene factor of many of these aspects right, but applying customization is going to become a very important point. And then lastly, the 4 approaches that Sue took you through on Workforce 01, we don't think they'll change. They're at a level that we think will apply in the next advances of talent management. But what underlies each of them, we think, will continue to evolve and develop. And this comes back to that notion of using analytics and using, concepts that have gone on in the marketing space and applying those into talent management become very, very important. So let me pause here. I'll turn it back to Craig. Hopefully, we gave you a little bit of insight as to some of the research that we're doing, the 4 approaches that underlie this notion and concept of customization into talent management. If anybody would like a copy of the book, you can reach out to me at Accenture. I'll be glad to send you a copy of the book as well, and we can figure out how to get my email in the post stuff to you guys, and I'll be glad to hand that back. But if you'd like, we can take some questions here. We've got a few minutes to go, and then we'll turn you back to the rest of the stuff. So with that, Craig, I'll turn it to you to figure out how we'll capture some questions here.
Thank you very much, David and Susan. Appreciate your insights into improving workforce performance through customized work experiences. And yes, we do have some questions from today's webinar participants, so let me pose the first one to you. This question is, does implementing a customization approach or approaches cost a lot of money for an organization?
Okay, so I'll take that one if that's okay, Sue. When we look at it, and you heard throughout the dialogue really outcomes. I think from my experience working in this space over the last 25 years, there's a couple of points. First, when we're applying these approaches and looking at the total picture of it, we spend a lot of time on the output and the outcome. And most organizations haven't done a very good job at that, candidly. Whether that's the productivity aspects, whether that's customer retention or employee retention aspects, whatever those outcomes you're trying to achieve, I talked about aligning to business strategy, and putting the business case together on it is really, really important. When you do that, what we know is the cost of this is actually cheaper. The perception that applying this level of customization to talent management practices is going to cost us more. In fact, there may be a slight spike up in implementation spend, but total cost of value, when we look at it singularly, I don't think I've looked at one instance, if you do that properly, that it's actually cost more. But it becomes this mindset that I think HR hasn't been very good at, that organizations haven't been good at, that are looking at the total picture, not just the cost spend, but the business benefit spend, and then doing the value equation, return on investment. And we know when you do that, it actually becomes a much more beneficial approach for the organization.
Great, thank you very much. I encourage everyone who's listening in, if you have questions, to please send them along. Here's another one for you, David, or you, Sue, whichever wants to take this. How do you ensure that this customization approach does not turn into chaos?
Sue, why don't you take that one?
Sure. It's a good question, and it's probably the key nugget or the most important piece of our research is that what you want to do is always make sure you have rules and standards. So when you think about the 4 approaches, all of those are still based on rules. So looking at segmentation, you basically still have rules, you still have standard practices, you just might have more of them than one single one for the entire workforce. But you still have, workforce and talent management practices, just multiple ones. Same thing with modular choice. Instead of just having one option available to your workforce, you just have a few of them. And by carefully managing the number of options and the number of ways you segment your workforce, it's very manageable and very scalable. Broad and simple rules. Again, it's a rule. It's got boundaries. We talked about Google's time-based boundaries. I gave some examples of the ability to have strategic boundaries. W.L. Gore employs still making sure that they create value within the strategy and the business goals of the company. Probably the one that is least defined and is most susceptible to chaos is what we call employee-defined personalization, where employees, for example, are learning from one another. But again, those practices are heavily supported and encouraged by the organization. They're monitored. The organization provides incentives, education, coaching on how to do that right, and that's how they maintain control. It's no longer control by just dictating one single workforce experience for all. Instead, we have multiple experiences, and we have other control mechanisms like coaching and education and incentives.
Great. Thank you very much, Sue. Here's another question from a participant. Has your research identified any smaller organizations, like not-for-profits, that are demonstrating some interesting customization practices to compete for or to retain talent?
So, Sue, why don't you start and I'll close off. I'll piggyback off you on that.
Okay. Let me just start by saying that I think for smaller nonprofit organizations that don't have a lot of budget, it's completely possible to implement a lot of these approaches. We didn't have a lot of those kinds of organizations in our research study, but just to give you an example, being able to offer personalized, consistent feedback and performance feedback doesn't cost hardly anything. Being able to implement some technology off the shelf that help people learn from one another, again, can be very cost-effective, very easy to implement. So, or the example of the restaurant chain segmenting their workforce based on different kinds of motivations for working. A small non-for-profit could do something similar. So I guess the message I'm trying to get across is that it doesn't have to be just for large, wealthy organizations. A very small organization could adopt many of these practices successfully as well. Do you have anything to add to that, Dave?
No, I think I was going to hit the same exact point when I think of nonprofits and the work that we do in that space. You look at the workforce, understanding the motive, you'll have different segments of the motivation of that workforce. Some are there for a job, and it's a job they've been able to capture. Many are there because of the social aspects of the job to the mission of the nonprofit. And how do you capture that and apply that, I think is, how I would think about it. Your restaurant analogy is a great analogy. And how do I deliver then, aspects that allow that social side of what they're trying to do, is really important. So that's where I would, I'd look at some of that.
Well, and here's an interesting question. How does an organization approach this transformation? Do you start with a single unit or department as a pilot, or do you start globally across the entire organization? What's the best way to get started with this?
Yeah, I think what we see, obviously, it depends on the organization, and it's not meant to be a cop-out answer, but it does depend on the organization. We see the very top of some senior business leaders, i.e. CEOs, the example, some of the examples that we use in the book of Microsoft are saying this is going to be a much more systemic approach to what we do as an organization. And so that one is a bigger picture view, and typically you start to look at, identifying your talent strategy for the organization. Almost every organization that I work with today is really trying to understand their talent strategy, human capital strategy, towards the year 2020. All the Fortune 500s are doing it in some form or fashion. And what I can tell you is then the concept of workforce of one and customization, is part of that strategy. Secondly, we do see it at a business unit level, as the question that came in. So some organizations are saying, this is part of our growth, this business unit, this location, this geography, and we've got to think about things differently than the organization as a whole. And again, right, that is a segmentation strategy if you really think about it. So it's a new service entity, it's a new geography that we're trying to grow in, and applying it to that. So looking for those aspects of the business strategy that allow it to, that are growth engines is where I begin to apply it as well. And we see a lot of positive uptake when you do that.
Great. So here's a tactical question. From the point of view of a Fortune 500 company, approximately how long does it take to segment the workforce, for example? And how is this segmentation achieved? Do you send questionnaires to employees and managers, or how do you do that exactly? So how do you tactically handle those items?
Yeah, I think when you, so that's a really good question. When you begin to look at and put in, define the scope of what you're trying to achieve, again, a business unit, a specific type, there are a number of techniques you use. Obviously, the person asking the question, there are some sides of it that look at questionnaires, that look at surveys, that go direct to the individual. You can actually use managers and manager-level discussions and annual reviews to pull out some of those if you don't want to use direct surveys as well. So that's sort of at the individual standpoint. The other side of it is at the strategy standpoint of what you're trying to achieve, with that business unit, with that entity, and the outcomes you're trying to achieve there, and look at different segmentation. So analytics come into play in helping you do that. Look at your existing employee base and begin to drive analytics on a number of different components, that begin to look at segmentation. Again, the great example I think that follows this conversation is the restaurateurs and what they do, and how they've done it, and look at 3 or 4 primary segmentations of their workforce. So a combination of the strategy side, and then either a survey or manager input from annual reviews or reviews, and bringing those two together and applying some analytics engines to look at that is typically the process that organizations go through.
This is Susan. I may just jump in and add something to Dave's point. Some organizations kind of on the forefront are actively mining, digital data to segment the workforce. So as an example, some organizations are mining people's electronic communications with an opt-in, with the permission of the employees. So they're mining people's emails and blog contributions and the like to determine their networking patterns. Who are they communicating with and what, and who are the experts, and are they a central hub communicating a lot of information in the organization, or more of a peripheral node? And then they segment by networking style, and then they can determine kind of who are the critical people in the organization for retention strategies and the like. So the forefront is to segment also on an array of digital information.
So we're getting close to the end of our time together today. Let me put out one more question to both of you. Which group have you found to be more accepting of customization, upper management or the general workforce? And a follow-on to that is, does management have difficulty giving up a degree of control to make this happen?
I laugh with that question because it's a very easy answer from my standpoint, and it's really the organization that has the hardest problems with it. It's actually not the employee and the individual. As we talked throughout, and the research showed, there's an expectation now from individuals, that customization is going to occur. There's a level of transparency, that occurs that is much higher than some traditional, leaders have from their expectations. And in fact, they would argue employees may go too far, in sharing and transparency than the level of control they want to have at an organizational level. So clearly, leadership is having some of these issues. The problem is it's actually having an impact, in many instances a negative impact, when they don't begin to work these processes into the organization. So it becomes really a change management issue for the organization, one, to put some boundaries in place for the employee, but also begin to get new levels of alignment and understanding into the leadership of the organization. Now we're seeing that change quite rapidly, which I think is a good news, meaning new leaders are coming into place that have a very different view than some even 5 years ago on this notion of customization. So the good news is we're seeing change, but balancing through a good change management program, both sides, is important, but it's a little bit harder actually for the leaders today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
I cheated, Craig. I put my email in the chat here. So if you guys do want a copy of the book, I'll be glad to send it to anybody that sends me a quick email. And if you have any other questions for Sue and I, we'll be glad to help you out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for close.
Yep, so that's all the time we have today. Additional questions, you can email them to ritalum@rit.edu, or you can tweet them to @RIT_alumni with a hashtag #MeRITWebinars. And we will direct your questions to David and Susan.